Minister, what are your plans to increase the financial and human resources available to the Legal Aid Board? I suppose I ask this in particular to enable persons with disabilities to vindicate their rights in court, in view of the fact that the assisted decision-making capacity bill will be commenced in November 2022, and also, I suppose, to realise our obligations under the UNCRPD. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Obviously, we continue to support the Legal Aid Board through allocated funding. This board delivers services through directly employed solicitors in its network of law centres around the country and private solicitors from its private practitioner panels. Maybe just to outline, the board operates a total of 34 full-time law centres along with a number of part-time centres. It operates 20 family mediation centres. 8 of the law centres and family mediation centre offices are co-located as well. The Legal Aid Board is obviously independent in its functions. I'm very aware and appreciative of the important work that it does. The funding overall amounted to €47.9 million in 2022, and there was an additional €3 million allocated in this year's budget to support persons under the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act. They're currently planning their arrangements within the board to provide services within this Act, and they've made a submission to me for the purpose of creating a private practitioner panel of solicitors to directly provide this service. As you'll be very much aware, the Programme for Government commits to commencing the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act 2015, obviously recognising the importance of the much-needed reform that it represents. It will bring into effect a new legislative framework to support decision-making by adults with capacity difficulties. It provides for a 3-tiered framework of decision-making assisted arrangements, co-decision-making agreements and decision-making representation orders. The Act also provides for the long overdue repeal of the Lunacy Regulation Ireland Act 1871 and the bringing to an end of the system of wardship for adults. All existing wards, of course, will be discharged over a 3-year period, and if appropriate, they will be transitioned to a decision support arrangement under the Act. In order to commence the Act, a number of amendments were required, so responsibility for this now rests with my colleague, the Minister for Children, Minister O'Gorman, and his department, and I know that he's progressing this legislation at the moment through the Houses of the Oireachtas. The bill contains these necessary amendments to enable the commencement of the full legislation as soon as possible thereafter. The bill proposes amendments to parts of the 2015 Act relating to enduring powers of attorney. So when it's commenced, new enduring powers of attorney will be required to create in accordance with the 2015 Act. It will no longer be possible to create an enduring power under the Act once Part 7 has been commenced.
Thank you, Minister. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I suppose just to point out that there's a whole section of the UNCRPD is dedicated to access to justice. And while we have, I think, approximately 643,000 people identifying as disabled in this country, there were only 73 complaints in 2019 to the WRC in relation to the Equal Status Act. Now, maybe this is a lack of awareness of how that's dealt with, or there's confusion over the WRC, because I suppose we assume it deals with Workplace Relations Commission, but it actually deals with discrimination in relation to access to goods and services as well. But I suppose as well, the free legal aid suggests that it is free, but there's actually you are supposed to make a contribution, which sometimes is significant. And according to the National Disability Authority, only half of disabled people are as likely to be in employment as those of working age. I suppose a greater concern is the wait time for the access to the Legal Aid Board. It was 44 weeks in January of 2021. And if someone has taken a case under the Equal Status Act to the WRC, that's much too long a time. But actually there's a further anomaly in that the Legal Aid Board is precluded for representing people in tribunals such as the WRC. So I think in relation to disabled people, they can't afford private legal representations in many cases, while employers and businesses can. So this leads to further inequality.
Look, I appreciate. Well, firstly, I just want to stress the important work of the Legal Aid Board. There is currently a review underway at the moment to see how they can support even more people and how we can look at the structures that have been put in place that have never been amended to make it easier and to expand those who can access the support and that those who need it. Obviously, this new legislation will require additional resources and will require us making sure that not only is there legal support there for people, that's why the £3 million was allocated in this year's budget, and as I mentioned, the Legal Aid Board are making their submission to try and put these resources in place for when the legislation is agreed. But we'll also, going back to a previous point, need additional judges to make sure that the legislation can be implemented, and again we have funding put in place. We'll have the Bridget McManus report in a couple of weeks, and all of this will ensure that when the legislation is up and running, people can have access to justice, be it getting support through the Legal Aid Board, being able to go to courts where that's necessary. And I think I suppose over time that figure will need to increase, the funding will need to increase, but it's important that we have that money there to start, and that obviously when the legislation is passed there's nothing holding it up, because this started when I was in mental health, which is a while ago now at this stage, and it's important that nothing prevents it from progressing.
Thank you, Minister. I suppose the extra resources are vital, and I welcome the fact that there will be extra resources provided. But I think that legal aid should be made available for people who want to take a case for discrimination to the WRC as well. But even within the WRC, that perhaps there could be a standalone body or a separate division of the WRC under a new name, which is very accessible and clear about what it has to deal with, so people know exactly where they go with complaints. You mentioned wardships and that they will be phased out under the Assisted Decision Making Act. So I'm just querying why. I know one constituent of mine has told me that her son, who is currently under a detention order, which we're not quite sure why, in a residential setting, is going to be made a ward of court in the coming weeks, or it will be looked at in court. I mean, that practice surely should not be continuing now that we're looking at phasing out wards of court come November, because, as you say, it's going to take about 3 years to actually remove everybody from wardship, and that's going to take considerable legal resources as well to do that. So, I mean, the practice should not be continuing, I presume, at this stage. So just to get clarity on that.
Thank you, Deputy. I suppose I'm not aware of the exact details of the case. I do know that the Minister intends to have the legislation enacted in the coming month, and obviously while there might be lead-in period, you're right, this legislation will be in place and should be implemented at the latest, I'd say, in the early new year. So without knowing the case, I'm not sure necessarily why that would be progressing in that regard. In terms of what people can access when they go to the Legal Aid Board, there'll be a number of things looked at in the Civil Legal Aid Review. It's been chaired by our former Chief Justice Frank Clark. The work has started, and that includes membership right across the board, marginalised groups, legal practitioners, academics, department officials and representatives from the Legal Aid Board who currently administer the scheme. So they'll be looking at not just who can access it and what the funding thresholds and everything else are, but they'll be looking at other elements as well, and I've no doubt that that will be part of the overall review.